One issue that many people have is when they create some sort of box on an HTML page, sometimes they not only want to horizontally align the content within that container, they'll also want to vertically align the content within the container. So I'm going to show you a technique that you can use to vertically align content within a containing element. The file that we're going to be working on is this basic page, and it just kind of has a neon sign. I'd like the text in this element to be centered, both horizontally and vertically. The HTML that we're going to start working with is fairly simple. It just is a basic page. It's pointing to an external CSS file. I have a main tag that contains a header with an H1 and an H2. I've already created most of the CSS that are styling the page to look as it does currently on the screen. So I'm importing some fonts. I have some rules on the HTML to have the brick wall display, and I'm using the cover background size so that it always fills the background of the page. On the body, I have a minimum height of 100%, and I also have a height of 100% on the HTML. That's to ensure that this radial gradient that I'm creating, it's a black to transparent gradient that I have that kind of draws the focus away from the black wall and kind of darkens it. That's to ensure that the gradient fills the entire height of the page. If I didn't have those two declarations, then the body tag would end before the end of the browser HTML page did, and I didn't want it to look like that. On main, I have some margin settings that just auto center it. I have some padding, and I set the width to 70%. On the header, I currently have some margin settings, and I've also specified a minimum height. This is to hold the sign open to have a minimum height of 300 pixels. If I have a lot of content within this neon sign, then the box will grow vertically, but it has to be at least 300 pixels. And I have some rules for the border and the box shadow, which is creating the kind of neon sign type glow. On the H1, I'm setting the font color, the font family, the font size, the weight, line height, margin, and a text shadow. And I have some rules for my H2, and I have a media query that simply just makes the H1 smaller when the screen is less than 550 pixels. Okay, so let's get to being able to both horizontally and vertically align the content. Horizontally aligning the content is going to be really easy. All we have to do is apply a text align center. And since I want both the H1 and the H2 to align, I can put that text align center on my header. So I'll go ahead and do that now. And when we do that, now all of the content is going to be horizontally aligned. Now to deal with the vertical alignment. Well, to have the content vertically aligned, one of the easiest ways that you can accomplish this is to have the parent element, and the parent element in this case is the header tag, have the parent element use a display of table. Now, when you use a display of table in CSS, you're not utilizing the table value in a bad way, and that's because it's separating that from the HTML content. This is part of the CSS. So when we tell the header to display as table, if I refresh, you can see how all of a sudden the header element has kind of shrunk and fit around the content of the text. I'm going to need to define a width value so that I don't have this problem. So I'll define the width, and let's just make the width take up 90%. And while I'm at it, I'm going to just assign some padding of 20 pixels. And this is just to assure that I have a little bit of spacing along the edges of my element. So if we refresh right now, you can see that I have a little bit of spacing, and now my neon sign is going to be wider. And this is a responsive type of page, so it shrinks and grows depending on the width of my page. Now to tackle the vertical alignment. To tackle the vertical alignment, I'm going to need to add something to my HTML. I'm going to need something that hooks around these two elements that's within the header. And if you think of how a table is normally set up, you normally have the table tag, and then inside the table tag, you have your table cells. So with our CSS, we have to have something display as a table cell, but we're going to need something that wraps around our H1 and H2. This could be anything. I'm just going to make a div, and I'll place my H1 and H2 within this div. Now, if you had other things on the page, you might want to assign a class or an ID, but I'm not going to worry about that because my page is really simple. I'll go into my CSS file, and I'm going to make a new rule. My new rule is going to be for the header div. And on the header div, we're going to tell it to display as a table cell. Once I have this displaying as a table cell, then I can go ahead and I have access to use the vertical align, and I can tell it to vertically align middle. Without the table cell, vertical align middle isn't going to work, but when you use it in conjunction with table cell, it is going to align the content vertically in the middle. So when I refresh my page, you can now see that the content within the neon sign is both vertically and horizontally aligned center. And if I resize my page, it will stay that way no matter what the size of the page. So this is a great little tip. It's really easy to do. All you do is assign the display of table to the parent element. You're going to need to supply some sort of width value, and then on the element that contains the items that you want to vertically align center, you're going to use the display table cell and vertical align middle.